Uh, so good. I'm glad everyone can hear me. I have no idea what happened there. That is bizarre. Anyway, um, I'm sure all of you have used the program. Opens up when you open up DBC Finance, should open up to the last database you've been working on. Obviously, you can go into data file and toggle to the prior data files you've been working on. All right. Oop, didn't mean to select that.
Can you share screen,
And
please? Sorry.
up, up. Sorry about that. Yep. Share. All right. Everyone good? Great. Everyone can see it? Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So obviously from here, we'll want to, um, if we wanted to create different issuers from the data file, we can go into existing and whatnot. So if I select 2024 Q4 training, click on new. What we're going to do today is obviously we're going to create a project finance. Um, and it really helps if you know going in if this is going to be, a multi-purpose type deal. That way that can save you a lot of work. And so, for example, in this example, we're going to set up a new money and a refunding. And then we're going to create a project finance. And we're going to have, um, you know, some different type of solution objectives. One is we want level savings. And then two, we want to wrap a new money um, series around a refund to produce some kind of overall solution. In this case, level debt service. Right. So if I said 2025 new money, let's say, we can do 2024. Eh, that's fine. Actually, I shouldn't even call it that. Should just call it something that's generic. ABC, or we already did that. DEF, county. And then within each issuer, that's where you can start to create your different series. Now, if you don't know so already, if you're going to do a refunding, make sure you create all the refunded series under a particular issuer. That way, when you run the refunding, it will only look at refunded bond series in a particular issuer. It won't look across the entire data file. Meaning, if I already created an ABC county, but I'm trying to run a refund in DEF county, can't look at, I can't pull in or import. What you'd have to do then is go into and either copy from ABC into DEF. That's what's usually done. But just know that beforehand so you don't have to, you know, create a bunch in different issuers and then have to do a bunch of copying. But there's some quick ways of doing it. But anyway, DEF county. If I go new, this is where, let's say it's 2000 new money series. By default proposed. Obviously, when I show you or we create the refunding, we'll make that switch. But default settings, if you don't know by now, let me just get rid of that. Default settings, there's a reason for it. What's most commonly created and or what's off of standard regulations and calculation methodology. So, for example, debt size assumptions, you can use the mouse, you can do the up and down, arrow key. It wouldn't make sense, for example, for interest frequency to be on anything other than semi-annual. That's more times than not the interest frequency. What's really, what's I think really good about the program is the help. Unlike a lot of other programs, um, when DBC started off, especially when programmers, I, when I started in '99, it was all clients calling in on the phone direct, and so, um, but before me, a lot or number of programmers also took client calls. And you want to stereotype programmers, they tend to want to program and not deal with a lot of their time with clients. So the good thing about that was they really tried to create help to make it as detailed and answer as many questions as possible so they could direct our clients to that. So anywhere in the program, if you go, for example, well, does this account for leap years? You press F1 anywhere in the program, and it will open up to that particular area that you're on. And so here's intraday basis. We tell you actual, and then we give more deep details, the actual 365, the leap years, and so forth. Okay. Another thing is FAQ. These are actually frequently asked questions. We've pretty much haven't added an FAQ in a long time. I think we've pretty much covered it. But it used to be if we would get a question from multiple clients over and over and over, we finally just one of us would write something up and then the next release we would add it. Some of them are very basic in nature and some can be a little more complex. But that's something I would recommend. Just hitting the F1 key, go to the FAQ, and or when you send us your information, sometimes we will copy and paste after we answer um, to your specific. So it's, sometimes we'll just copy and paste at the end. Glossary. I think this really helps, especially if you are calculating something and you're coming up with a little bit different number. For example, common is, clients saying the lesser of test of a reserve fund, 125% of average annual adjusted debt service. I got this. DBC has given me that. A lot of times we'll tie it out for you, but then we'll also show you, well, here's the formula. You know, that's just kind of a quick um, uh, and then see 7 1. You'll notice the blue font color that's manually inputted by the user. That really becomes a lot more important. I would say, we do get a lot of support of, how come I'm not, let's say, um, how come I don't have any bonds in this particular year? Or why am I not getting a level debt service in this particular year? First thing is I will go into the bond component, go into the maturity structure tab, and if I see anything in blue, it's you hard coded or someone in your firm hard coded an amount, whether it's zero or some amount. You're telling the program, this is what I want. The program won't override anything you've hard coded in. Okay. So you'd have to delete that out and then calculate it. Cost of issuance, underwriter's discount, kind of like in the quote basic class. Um, I don't typically recommend using these two tabs for a couple of reasons. One, you'll notice dollar per $1,000 par amount, percentage of par, some kind of an amount. It has to fit under one of those three scenarios. So it's not that flexible. That's one. The other issue is if you do add something here, say for 250,000, and you click OK, you have no idea just going into the general area, right? You have to go into layers of the program to see it. So it's hidden. That's another issue. And then finally, if this is part of a financing, you cannot, because it's hidden, you don't see it as an icon. We'll get this a lot. We'll get, let's say in this example today, hey, I set up a new money. I set up the refunding, set up the project finance. I have tons of different cost of issuance and underwriters discount that I created in the new money and in the refunding. How do I instead calculate it in aggregate and let's say allocate it pro rata across? But well, if you create it in here, you basically have to delete it and start fresh in the financing. At least if you went instead, right? I know I'm jumping the gun here. At least if you create it as an individual expense or an issuance expense. See, this gives you at least a lot more flexibility. You can enter in different types of formulas that don't fit under one of those three criteria. At least anything you enter, you can right mouse click cut, or we can save it, put it in component gallery, and then retrieve it in the financing. So you don't have to start fresh. So that's good information to know. If you know early on this is going to be part of a financing. If it's not and you don't know, I would say create them as itemized or issuance expense. And I'll show you how to save that when we get to it, and where you can retrieve it in any other data file, any other series. Um, we also have some clients that say, well, they kind of, almost every deal they set up X amount of different expenses. Do they have to start from scratch? No, you don't. And I'll show you that. And another thing, going down, we try to make it as as logical as possible. Set up general bond information, set up bonds themselves, project fund. Now, because we know this is going to be part of a financing, all I'm really going to be doing is setting up the bond components. Any kind of funds, whether it's project, reserve, cap I, expenses, I'm going to create that on the project finance level. That will save, by doing that, again, allows a lot more flexibility. Also, you don't have to go into particular series. And again, it may not be on your case a new money refunding. It may be a bunch of different series altogether. So if I go detail, let's say let's say 55. As we talked about, what's most commonly created are serial bonds. So you pretty much don't have to make any changes here. If these were cab serials, we'd compound until maturity date. These were convertible cabs. We'd enter in the final compounding date for them to then start to calculate simple interest. You'd make that change. Naming it serial, naming it a term bond, that doesn't mean that's how it's going to compute, meaning when we create a couple of term bonds, you have to select the price to final maturity. By default, serial bonds price to actual maturity. We'll go in here and we can say, let's see, again, like any other Windows-based product, right mouse click brings up a menu, F5 key also. And a lot of these keystrokes also help tutorials, whether it's one of these three. I don't know if everybody's gone through the tutorials. Obviously, we try to stress that it does help. I would not let, especially if you look at debt size and refund and you go, oh my gosh, there's a lot of pages here. Don't let that dissuade you. Just know that every example that we provide in the tutorial, we print out every available report. So the actual meat and potatoes, the actual what you need to hard code in is not a lot. Project finance a lot thinner because it assumes you already know how to set up a debt size and refund. We provide the specs and expect you to kind of, without hand holding, you to set that up first. But in the debt size refunding, I believe towards the end, there are additional keystrokes also in help. We provide some as well. You can always email us as well if you're more into keystroke than, say, using the mouse or using the pointer and so forth. So if you forget, enter dates. You can also you can re-enter them in. Again, default annual. If they're semi-annual, you make that change. And there's no day alignment by default. You can make that change. So you could say the first business day, for example. Obviously, January 1st is not on a business day. That's on a holiday. So you can also copy and paste from, say, Excel. If you've got the dates, you can come in here and you could say +6, meaning 6 months. It can get fairly complex. You could say +7 days, for example, and on 7 days down. But if I go back here and just do +12 months, same thing with rates. Let's say it starts at 1%. We have some kind of again, you can copy and paste. I'll also show you the MMD yield. I don't have an account with Thompson, but I'll show you just in case if you do. If you do get these MMD yields or you have the information on Excel, again, you can copy and paste. Plus, let's say 0.0125. Copy count, if I want it to go down a certain amount of cells at this copy operation, it'll do that. If I leave it blank, it goes all the way down, for example. I would say the big thing here is even if this is correct and you protect and or you hard code it in, you'll notice blue font all the way across. When we run or when you calculate, you will get a warning, not an error message, a warning just saying rate, yield, price are all protected. Make sure and verify the reports that they're accurate because they may not be. I would sometimes can see this, especially when you're hard coding or you're copy and pasting back and forth, and there's a lot more than, 30 lines and you're doing a lot of work, or it's something like 0.01275 or something like that. Instead, I would recommend keeping one out of the two columns. Allow the program to calculate it or accurately. That will save you because again, you'll get a warning message and it may be totally right. But what if, you input lots of maturity rate yield price, hard protect all of it, and you're just barely off on one? Then that's where it gets into, you know. So you can highlight the whole column or a particular cell and hit the delete, it will snap back. Take down per bonds, you can see, if it's 5 per bond, you'd enter that in. By default in 5,000 denoms. Pretty much everywhere in the program, if there's an amount, it's in thousands, except itemized expenses. That's, you need to hard code that to the penny, and or some kind of an amount for a cap I on a certain draw date or balance requirement on a certain date. But that's rare that you're going to be doing that. So I would say, except in itemized expenses, pretty much everywhere in the program, an amount, they're going to be in thousands. I believe that's a programming to keep the program as, be able to calculate as quickly as possible. Anytime you have to kind of scroll off of your main page, that's by design. It's typically just inputs that aren't commonly used. VAR will be used if you have a bifurcated maturity, where you have the same date, maturity date. Typically the rates differ. If you don't give it a unique, so if these first two were on January 1st, 2026, you need to give it some kind of a unique variant. And again, any of this you forget, watch the video, or you're in this area, hit F1 and it explains it for you. Plus you'll get a warning message, because if not, it will then bond for the cheaper bond, because the objective in the program is to meet your solution requirements at the lowest borrowing cost. And we'll get into, once we get into the project finance, because a lot of times it's, well, I need a certain series to retire first. How come it's not doing that? Well, because if it does, your borrowing cost is not as low, given all the, given the solution structure, given, the different rates and so forth. A lot of times it will, but kind of keep that in mind. Right. So I would say about the only area, also, you have to scroll over. Advanced areas, same thing. Typically not areas that you're going to always be entering information. I would say if there was a period that we had some clients that they did almost everything was variables. And so I would say that's about the only time. If you're always having to put in variable rates, starting this date to this date, the rates change here. And again, F1 gives more explanation, more detail. I would say that's about the only time. Multi-mode table, your interest payment dates may not be on every 6, they may be on odd days. You can hard code those in the frequency interest date basis. Assume call dates. This, especially if these are bonds that might be priced or subjected to be priced to the call for pricing and or ARB, it will do the lesser of the yield to maturity, yield to call. Sometimes we'll have clients saying, I know it's pricing to the call date. I don't want it to. I'm trying to match someone's numbers. Well, we'd tell them, we'll go in here and you'll see it populated. You can do NA under the call date to, exclude that. Again, F1, it talks about be careful, kind of overriding this section. And again, you can go through your PPU IDs, tax law IDs. Again, a lot of this, if you need something, um, auto end of month alignment for payment dates, we will get sometimes clients send us saying, hey, I want every 12:30, 6:30. Why am I seeing a 12:31, for example? Well, off of industry regs, standard, um, it automatically aligns for payment date on the end of that month. And we would just say, or support, uncheck that, and you're on your way. And again, anywhere in the program, you have any questions, your first thing, print preferences, you're going to put in all your company email information. This is Thompson Municipal Market Monitor. This is, you'll know this from your firm. And you can ask, do we have a TM3 account? If you do, great. You can input that in, and then I can show you where you can automatically, when we get to it, automatically download MMD yields, spreads, credit spreads, additional spreads. If not, I would say, if I had to guess, probably most of our clients don't have it, or they don't know that they have it, only because we don't get a lot of support on this. And when we do, it's usually, you know, wanting to know if we have that info. And it's like, no, that was when Thompson bought us and owned us temporarily, for a bit. And they put into our software the TF3 account for Municipal Market Monitor. Each branch office of your firm gets, I believe it's, 60 downloads for open markets. I believe it's per calendar year. Um, but typically, depending on how, um, depending on your IT, how hardcore it is, um, you know, that will determine whether or not you can, and you can always email us, say, hey, I want OMS information. And what we do is we look it up, and then we will send you an email with instructions. Here's the login name. Here's the password. Um, and you can enter that in. And then when you do that, you go to the SECS button, and this is where you can download slugs, current, historic. If it is historic, you have to type in the date. Slugs are free to download, and it'll tell you where. And you can direct it to a different folder, and I'll show you that. So, and we'll get more into that when we get into the refunding. Okay, there's not an automatic, um, save function, and you may go, well, why not? Well, what if you're in a particular file and you're saying, well, what if the rates change and this change? You don't want all of a sudden the program to just automatically save it. And you go, wait a minute, I didn't. It's real easy. Control S. You notice it was really quick. And I don't even have that. This work laptop I'm using it's not a brand new laptop by any means. So Control S or File Save. You'll notice at the bottom it usually will say the series is saved to the database. You can have multiple series open. You could say save all. Now, if you don't, and you try to like hard exit out or file exit, it'll say you've made changes. Do you want to save? Click yes. I used to stress this a lot, and even myself when I did. This was before I moved to Austin. I remember we had a client, and I was doing consulting for them, and I didn't save. And about 3 hours into it, my computer locked up, my work computer. So when we were all in the office, and I kind of chuckled because at that point I'd trained many times, I'd harped on it, and even myself, I didn't. So just know, um, if you're working on hard coding a lot of information, it's real easy. Control S or just click save or go to file save. There's a number of different options, right? Um, tools, preferences, restore backup file, backup option. Oh, no, this is actually, I was wrong about the autosave. The autosave is activated. That is somewhat of a newer um, option. By default, it is checked. You can make that change. Autosave timer intervals. Maximum number of autosave files, 5. So we will get this. I would say, though, if you keep the program running, it's like anything. You keep multiple programs running, you don't ever exit out of them. A lot of times, depending on your PC system resources can start to go down. Sometimes you'll view the reports and they look a little funky. A lot of times they'll say exit out of the program, go back in, calculate, and that resolves the issue. Um, if not, we do have clients all the time saying, hey, I did all this work. I came in the office the next day. I don't see it. Well, we'll say, go to restore backup file, give you the directions, or you hit the F1 key and it tells you. And you should be able to locate it and then be able to recover. You have auto save recovery down here. You'll notice up here, I would say if you are downloading, which is free slugs, if you've got OMS files, you know, either you do it yourself or someone at your firm says, oh no, our open market, we have one person that downloads it and we put it on this drive, shared drive. That's where you can go click on the dot, dot, dot. You can locate the path and select it. Um, just know, like anything that's on a shared drive, if somebody deletes it, you have that issue. Um, there's pluses and minuses to whether it's your own file or own drive versus shared. Right. So, but any kind of system resources here or system preferences, these are unique to we'll tell you, hey, put your company name. Because when you start viewing the reports, it'll say prepared by DBC Finance. Where do I go? Tools, preferences. But a lot of times, that's why we have a send us your file. Because when you go to help email data to DBC, it won't send a DF2 file. It's a DFX file. It's basically like a database file, except it's everything is set in stone that you've done yourself, right? So, for example, it will show what version of the program you're running it off of. It will show if you went in here and your question was, you know, I don't want these bonds to be rounded, even though the standard is round to the nearest cent in aggregate. You could say that's fine. I'm trying to match someone's numbers. I'm off a penny. A lot of times we'll go in here and we'll see this changed. And again, anything changed is in blue, or at least it's not in black if you change the font color. But by default, it's blue. I think it's even darker than that. Um, that helps us. The quote old days, it was you sent your entire data file. Well, the problem about that is when I open your data file, all my system preferences replace yours. And that also includes different version of the program. So that's why we always stress go to help, email data to DBC. It's not only the easiest, but there's a reason. Um, I would say more times than not, you'll only go into the internet settings and you may, you know, obviously change to your company name and the company name. And then slug, you may want to direct it, because if you don't direct it somewhere and you think it is being directed to, say, a shared drive, but you've downloaded a slug on your local PC, your local drive, and that happened to be a month or two ago, it's going to use that. And we'll get to that once we get into the refunding. So let me do another couple more. Term bond, term 60. And again, just because we called it term, that's just a name. We need to make sure price to final maturity. Right? And then we can say 56, 60. And you can do one slash, one slash. You can do, one period, one space, one, there's um, dash. I think there's about 5 or 6 different ways. Um, and what's important about this is that if you didn't make that change here, kept on price to actual maturity, it'll assume these are 5 separate price to each maturity serial bonds versus this is one term bond that matures in 2060 with sinking fund payment date starting in 56. This is say so obviously because of that, the rate yields price needs to be the same. Now, one more, just to kind of it's 61. Let's just say it's 2 3/4. Again, this is information you'll have. And again, you create as many bond components as need be. Now, you could say, well, there's a project fund, there's a reserve fund, but that and the cap I, it's going to be an aggregate, but not the project fund. I would recommend anything else, if you do know it's going to be part of a financing, to just do it in the financing. If you don't know and you created icons, that's fine. I'll also show you how to easily kind of navigate or update. Okay. So this is just kind of a shell or just the bond components for the new money series. I click open. Again, I'm going to keep this on DEF County. Actually, this will be a good thing. Let's say I go, oh, okay, I'm starting my refund, but I did create under a different issuer, let's say 2018 refunded series. How do I get that into the DEF county? Because when we're going to create the refund case in the DEF county, when we go to refund the bonds, it's not going to show anything in the different issuers. Well, there's a couple of ways. If you right mouse click and go copy, and you type in DEF as the short name and OK, the only issue is it will copy everything under ABC, which A, you may not want to do because then you got to go in and start deleting. B, what if under DEF county, let's say there's a 2015 short name. It will override that. And it'll give you a message saying, whatever you're copying from ABC to DEF, if it's the same short name, it's going to override. Are you okay with that? Well, sometimes you can be like, no, I'm not okay. So in this case, if it's just one, let's just to show you the 2018. This goes out to 60. I'm going to go in here. This is just 2.5 million. And again, you'd hard code that in and the information. And then these are premiums. Here's the call date. Now, I've noticed this a lot of times. The call date, especially these are all bonds older than 2018. If the call table falls on or prior to the delivery date of the refunding series, obviously those bonds are immediately called on delivery and it's all cash because slugs to purchase interest bearing slugs need at least 30 days from purchase to when those slugs mature. Okay. So a lot of times it's, oh, in the OS, there's a 30 days notice. Whether I enter that in, you'll enter that in there. That just means regardless if it is on or prior or less than 30 days from delivery, it's going to at least be called 30 days from delivery, right? So, how do I get this into into the different issuer? You've already created it. You don't want to have to create it from scratch. You can go to File, Save As. You just select the other issuer. Now you can give it a different name, which is fine. If you're like, no, that's fine. All right. Now, when I go open, now you'll see it copied in there. And you're like, well, I don't need it in here. Well, you can always select it and you can hit delete if that's what you want to do. All right. So we have one series. That's fine. Let's create another one because we're going out, I think, to what was it, 65, I believe. So open DEF County, new. Let's just say it's I don't know, 2020. What's important about the status is it doesn't calculate it differently. It's going to be when we create the refund case, and we want to select the refunded bonds, only the series with status actual refunding will appear. So again, if you forget, you can go back open, select the particular, go edit, and then you can make that change if need be. So this is 2020. I'm just going to kind of stick with the same. I would say, unless it's, well, we'll get into that once we do the actual refund case. The big thing here is if you have prior reserves, those don't automatically transfer over into a refunding. Those have to actually be input in the refund case itself. So knowing that, you can, if you want to run the numbers just on the actual series, and you want to see a reserve fund, those numbers in the reports, if you just say running the 2020, sure. But just know that that does not get allocated or transferred over. And you may go, why not? Well, we never really got and we asked this for years. I believe we had a competitor that you could do that. Well, the problem is it would transfer 100% of the remaining reserve fund. Well, what if it's a partial refunding, right? So I don't know if they ever updated that or whatnot, but at the time, it was kind of like, well, wait a minute, if you're doing a partial refunding and with the click of a button, it transferred over 100% to the reserve fund, that's at least what I was told, or what clients who had another program, this was years ago, So when I was working in New York, and I would just kind of go, well, that's so we would always try to ask clients, okay, well, every time, do you want it like, we never got, there's no industry, um, I guess, standard. So again, I'm just going to do it to 65. And again, this is going to be OS, all information that you're going to have. Right. So now you could say, well, do I need a hard code in, these bonds that have already retired, already matured? Um, I would always say, again, if you ever want to run, you know, the reports from the actual series and you want to see it in its original, non modified form, I would. Um, Kind of my other one little bit of a complaint is when we do run a refund, it's going to give you a warning saying, hey, you selected bonds to be refunded that have already matured. And I think that was put in there because we had a number of clients for some reason who wanted that warning to tell them. Um, Cabs, if you ever do structure cabs, especially, actual, that's another problem. If you just update and go, oh, I'm going to have the date and delivery of these actual series match the refunding date and delivery, and I'm going to start cutting out maturities that occurred prior. Well, the problem is then when you create a cab, those that's compounded from the original typically dated or delivery date, so that can cause problems. So what I was always told, um, was just it may take more time, but hard code in all the information. That way you don't go, wait, did I remove, oh, this is a cab now. Why is it not calculating correctly? Well, you updated, you don't have the original dated delivery, so forth. All right. So if I've got, and again, these could be obviously they're all going to be different amounts. And you type all that in. But, let's just say I'm just going to do 180 million total. You know, let's just say it's 3%. Uh, these are going to be par, and then I'm going to do a call table. Or just because you create one or more call tables, remember, doesn't automatically mean, because you could create multiple call tables, and so it won't automatically. In this case, you had two different call tables. How would it know which one to call? So, create the call table, call provision setup. And again, I was saying though, as if it's, there is a 30 days, you type that in. In this case, it doesn't matter because these bonds are obviously called after 30 days from the delivery date of the refunding series when we get to that. Mm-hmm. So, actual series, we got a couple here: 2018, 2020. I'll show you if it's, well, I don't have, I don't have the rates. I have the amounts, I have the principal, I have the interest amount. Um, can it back in? If I know what the interest amounts or the debt service amounts, I know the principal amounts, can the program kind of backfill, provide the rates in order to come to these. No, unfortunately, the program can't do that. But in the refund case, when we get to it, I'll show you if, you know, now there's limitations to that because they really aren't considered refunded bonds. It's more of a screen entry cash flow. But sometimes we have clients saying, I need to achieve, I can't, we can't figure it out why let's say the interest off the refunded bonds are giving me, this amount. And we'll show you, well, it's being calculated correctly. And it's, well, I know I'm trying to match someone's number. It needs to be this. Well, you can subtract or add, especially for savings and or escrow purposes, you can, add or subtract to meet certain interest amounts, so to speak. All right. So I'm going to save these. And you notice there's a little bar there that will. So if I go back to open, now we've created a couple action series, created kind of just the bonds of the new money. Now let's do the refund case. You'll notice the different icon, little R, a little bit different setup. Now you'll notice this appear. So in the quote old days, you had to create separately a proposed refunding series and link it. And it was a different short name. Well, we had enough clients that said, look, I've got, 30 different refund cases with different proposed refunding. How do I know? I have to basically go into each refund case and to figure out what proposed refunding is attached to it. Well, kind of made sense. Yeah, let's just have it the same. And unless you go into an advanced, it's the tools, preferences, view settings, advanced view settings, right? You can see synchronized refund series of the refund case. So by default, makes the most sense when you create a refund case, it'll create a proposed refunding series. And let me just, sorry, I'm going to get out of this. Okay. So if you haven't created a refund case at this point, there's no point of creating a proposed refunding series first. Because if you do, then you have to go in here and you have to select whatever the other proposed refunding series that you've already created. So I'm going to go into the proposed refunding series. This is the refunding series information, right? So we'll kind of stick with this 1/1/25 theme. Again, cost of issuance, underwriter's discount, whether it's, fits under one of these three. Again, remember it's hidden, and also it cannot transfer. And then basically, if you create in a project finance issuance costs and you have issuance cost in the particular series, one will not override the other. So it will double count. And why create more work if you already know, which you may not, but it's always best to kind of create it as an issuance cost type expense here and or itemized. And I'll show you in a moment. So bond components, again, this is where we can create, serial. Here, we'll just do to 60, and then we'll do a term again. Serial bonds through 2060. Automatic. 1/1/26. 1/1/60. And again, if these were premiums, if they were discounted, again, something like that. Again, recommend 2 out of the 3 columns to allow the unprotected column, whether it's the price or yield, for that to correctly populate. If you hard code all of them and it's exact and it matches, again, great. But again, all it takes is you thinking that, and then you realize, wait a minute. I know the warning told me, but I didn't do something right. So here I'm going to do one of the 65. The only reason these are going to equal the refunded bonds is because we're going to use the refunded debt service as a way to structure the new debt term bond. Let's say it's to if these bonds are callable, you'd select that, select the particular. Right. Again, if there was a project, not really in refunding, but a reserve fund, cap by specific expenses, by all means, if it's specific, whether it's, say, a new money project fund, specific expense, you can leave it. If you've already created, that's fine. But me personally, I like, if I am running a financing, to try to stay in the financing the majority of the time. So save that. So that's the proposed refunding automatically is linked to this refund case. And again, we have to run any kind of refund through the refund case. That's where the escrow, you'll notice portfolio, we start getting into these. In order to run an escrow, it has to run through a refund case, not a proposed refunding, not an actual series, not a proposed series, in an actual refund case. That's how you're going to generate your escrow. So, refund assumption setup, by default slugs. You can make a change if it's a PV, if it's just a cash, if it's combination, but obviously default more times than not slugs. Now, this can be a little confusing because you go down here. Now, escrow purchase date, you may not have proposed refunding series attached. You may just go, I'm just going to generate an escrow. This is a cash defeasance. I'm not generating a new bond. You can still go into the proposed refunding and just enter in the dated delivery date. Or if you don't, you can specify what that date is. By default, it's the new delivery date of whatever you enter in a proposed refunding series. Current slug rate files when you download. So for example, today, when you saw me download SECS slug files, it'll say, here's where installed. Remember, tools, preferences, general tab. It's going to save it. It really saves it twice. One as an actual date, 18 December 24th slug, but it also is going to save it as current slug. So it really saves it twice. Current doesn't mean necessarily today's slug. It means the last time, wherever it's linked in this path, right? So it's here. I'll put it in this folder called stuff. You'd probably label it slugs. So just know if someone that you know at your firm is like, oh yeah, no, we aren't, you don't need to download the slugs, we already did it, and you're not linked to wherever they downloaded it, you could just assume current means, oh great, okay, it's today. Well, when you start running the numbers and view the escrow reports, you'll see Oh, wait a minute, this slug is not current. So current can mean today, it can mean yesterday, last week, last month, or if you don't have it linked anywhere and you deleted all your slug files, you won't have anything. How do you know it is current? And then, so you really have two. So obviously, tomorrow, if you download, right, it'll update the current dot slug to be, the 19th. And when you click on this down arrow, you'll see current, you'll see 19 DEC 24, and then 18 DEC 24. Where I think this is important is sometimes we will have clients that will send us their refund and they'll say, it's been whatever, a month. I needed to go back and reprint or print out the reports when I open up the refund case or project finance the refund case in it. And I calculated, I've got different numbers. Why is that? My, if I answer it, my first thing is I'll go and I'll say, was it kept on current? Most likely in the past month, you've downloaded new slug files. Now, a month from now, the slug, those rates, that you're going to be for your escrow, purchase slugs, right, to pay off these old bonds, most likely those rates have changed. So you're going to get a different escrow. Obviously, then now your new bonds is going to produce something different to meet those changes. So if you select the actual, and you may not do that early on because you're like, well, every day I'm going to be running the numbers and I don't want to have to keep making, just know if you select the actual, that's not going to matter. Now, the other side is, hey, how come my escrow won't change? And I've been downloading slugs every day. Well, the opposite. Well, you have it on 18 December, and that sometimes happens. So just know if it's on current, click on the down arrow. It'll tell you what the current one is, and it may be 18 December 24th, or it may not be. And you can always, for free, download the SCCS button. If you select the actual slug rate file, then no matter what happens, that slug file is locked in. So I would say definitely once this is done, I would make sure and try to select that. But again, just so you know, global proceeds escrow, if this is, you got to add cash again in thousands, you'd enter that information here. But we are actually going to have a little bit, we're going to actually have a transfer amount from a prior reserved, and we want it spent a certain way, and we want it to be, and then the rest is going to fill with bond proceeds in regards to the escrow. So it's not going to be just a global 100% fill with bond proceeds type escrow. Once you enter in any information in this other section, this escrow section, you'll get a warning basically saying, hey, general proceeds escrow, you have it activated, anything entered in here, whether you put NA, non-restricted, it's not restricted, or you put in a percentage, this gets all ignored. And that gives you a warning message, so you'll know. Unless you uncheck, doesn't really matter. If you uncheck, then you calculate that warning won't come up. But we'll get to that in a moment. Automatically, the new information, then proposed refunding, we go in there. How do we pull in the existing? Go to details, click create. This is where you can go in, you can start to select. And again, you create and you don't see it, and it's in under the same issuer. Remember, go to open, select that series, edit, make sure the status is actual. Now you may go in here and go, I don't want to, for some of these bonds, I want, instead of 4 million, I want 2 million. You can select that. Now, what usually happens, or what we usually get, is, what if I want to refund a percentage, let's say, of these bonds? Do I have to go in here and figure out the percentage and then hard cut? No. You first select your bonds, and then you go to input bonds. So you select the bonds you want to refund. Then you go to input bonds, dot, 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 click import. Do you want to overwrite? Yep. So this imports all the bonds, right, from 18 and from 2020 series. You'll see over here. And then let's say it's straight down or just certain, you can highlight. Now, obviously, if it's, well, I want this and then I want this, well, you can't bypass. So it's either next to one another or not. Or you may have it already calculated, the percentage in Excel, and you just copy and paste. Now, this, just to show you, you can go modify, and let's say it's times, let's say it's 85% times 0.85. So now it shows you 100% is the 285 million. 85% of that is 242 and change. Now, the problem about this, I mean, if you know it's going to be a percentage, this is the way to do it. And whether or not you have to use a modifier or not, or you already have the percentage. The only thing is, if you click OK, and then down the road, all of a sudden, call table, that information gets changed. Some gets changed in the actual series. Anything gets changed. This is, remember, in blue, it's set in stone. So basically, if you go, hey, we get this a lot. My call table, I set it to January 1st, for the 2020 series. These bonds are supposed to be called on, let's say they're, instead of 2030, it was 2032, whatever the change is. It's, oh, I made updates to the 2020. Why are my bonds being called on January 1st, 2030? Because if you go into the 2020 series, that call table, it differs because it's been updated. One of the first things I'll do is I'll go in here and I'll notice input bonds, and I'll say, well, did you update? Nope. So once you update, right, and then whether or not you make any changes or not, that's what it's going to show. And then, so any kind of changes in the actual series, you'll have to come back here and do an import again and make that change, and then whatever it happens to be. Just to let you know, more times than not, it's going to be on select bonds. But you remember I mentioned, well, what if I had, slight differences in the escrow and can't figure out why, or I don't have the coupon, I don't have the interest rates. I just want to enter in cash flow. That's where this from screen entry cash flow occurs. And you can type in the dates. If it was, 1/1, let's say is it 2000? Yeah, 2030, for example. And you may know what the principal requirements, interest, or redeemed, or call premium. So you may not know on the call table like exactly, but you know what the amount happens to be, and it differs than what's being produced. You can add or subtract. So these columns represent escrow changes in the escrows, right? Especially the escrow requirement. These represent changes in savings. So again, I don't know how this isn't used a lot, but just to let you know, if you ever have any kind of escrow slash savings from the prior debt that needs to be added or subtracted, you can go in there. Or again, you don't have the OS, you don't have the bond, you know what the principal escrow, the principal requirements, maybe the premium requirement amounts, interest, and you go, well, program won't back into that. I can't just go create an actual series where I can't hard code in interest. So I got the interest amounts, but I can't, won't allow you to just hard code those in. How do I do it? It's going to be a screen entry. Okay. So funds on hand. This is when you may have a, set aside payments. You may have some kind of equity contribution. You may have, a lot of times it's a prior reserved. Um, Now we do have an FAQ on BAB subsidies. Those can automatically, in the prior icon advanced, you'll see prior ongoing expenses. If you create any ongoing expenses in any actual series that you're refunding, you can activate that, and that will adjust the savings and solution. But again, even I would say the most common is, say, a subsidy, which is some kind of a negative interest amount. Um, the only issue with that is, again, what if it's a partial refunding? Well, then we actually have to create an other formula, and then we have to kind of link it instead of just automatically accounting for it. But let's say this is a debt service, like a 2020 debt service reserve fund. Let's say it's 50,000, right? But you also want to account for it. You want to purchase slugs. You want reduced bond proceeds. This is going to be spent a certain way in the escrow. How do I do that? Well, you'll see spend remaining in escrow name. Give us some kind of a short name. So I could say, let's see. It doesn't matter. You could say DSRF 2020. It doesn't really, I mean, it'll show up in certain reports, but you can always, um, you know, have it excluded. It's not by default going to adjust for the bond solution. And by default, it's going to show up in the savings report in the savings summary report, the summary section of the savings report. So pretty sure everybody here has seen savings report. You can imagine the top part is that cash flow. The bottom is that savings summary. Now, if you go, well, it needs to be a cash flow, then most of the time you're going to do as cash flow. You're going to type in the maturity date, what the rate happens to be. Okay? But again, by default, it's up front. So this is going to be, but we're not done yet. Spend remaining in escrow. It could be spent first in a new reserve fund. That's where you can select the down arrow. In this case, we didn't create a new reserve fund or haven't yet. But so this is going to be spent a certain way. Click on escrow. So how is this going to be spent? Let's say it is yield limit is to the ARB yield. If it's not, you can do NA, or you can hard code in some kind of a specific yield limit. Then you have different choices here. Obviously, this is not filled with bond proceeds. Here's kind of a select first, and you go, well, I'm not quite sure. Again, F1, a lot of times we will direct. So select first, solution requires that the same securities be used for all escrows. Total requirements are funded by one escrow with one cost, and then carved up into individual escrows, each consisting of a portion of the securities purchased. All right. Select first, obviously, funds the earliest escrow requirements in their cost equal to the amount of the funds on hand amount. So then I type in some kind of a short name for the filled remaining bond proceeds. That's how you would set that up. Now, if for some reason this is based off of a formula and you don't know what that is, if it's a percentage, a negative, like a subsidy, a negative percentage of the prior interest, that's where you have to go into the proposed refunding series or in the financing, in the universal components, other formula. You would hard code that formula and you scroll all the way over and then you would link it here or hard code in the funding formula. Anytime you see anything that says formula, that just means, okay, you can create an other formula and link it. Let me pause. Savings assumption. I'm sure as you know by now, anytime you look at the savings report and you want something included or excluded, a lot of times, if you say, look, I don't want my future expenses, or I don't want, the rounding amount to be accounted for in the savings, summary, click NA, or a reserve fund, a new reserve fund. I would say also FAQ in the refund questions. What are the prompt settings for common savings and bond solution? This is one of the little bit more complex, but we kind of break it out what you need to check and uncheck if you want to gross to gross, net to net, gross to net, and so forth. Because there's a solution portion and a savings or a component to a refund. So, you can account for a new reserve fund as a cash flow to adjust the new debt, but it may not account for the adjustment in the savings report, right? So that FAQ kind of breaks down what settings need to be changed. So if you did have a new reserve fund, you want to account to adjust the debt service, you would have to go into solution assumptions, setup, solution adjustments, and you would have to make that change, adjust debt service. Just making that change though, and then you calculate, you view the solution report, you'll see level savings on the solution side because that new reserve fund is accounted for. But in the savings, the new reserve fund is just upfront. It's not in the cash flow section. So you'd have to make that change. Then that shows kind of a net to net savings and solution. But again, that's why we're here. We get that a number of times. And then at the end, that's another thing. And any kind of refund, it must be a programming. It always kind of felt like it'd be great if it was just default uniform. That's level savings. Because if it's level or equal, it's not going to look at the old debt to structure. It's going to either produce level debt service on the proposed refunding, regardless of what the prior debt is, or equal principal. The one difference, you'll go to solution, bond solution revenues. You'll see include prior debt service by default, yes. And again, if you add revenue amounts and you don't add it in the savings assumption, again, you'll have different assumptions. You'll go, wait a minute, you know, I excluded prior debt service. I put in my own dates and revenue amounts. Why does my savings look so different? What I'll say, go in here because it's viewing prior debt, so your prior expenditures. You would need to turn that on, and or you would do a screen entry for the adjustments if that's the case. So just to kind of let you know, the savings and solution um, don't always match. Just depending on, when you start adding funds on hand amounts, you have new, I want to adjust, you know, expenses, BAB subsidy. You would, if it was based off a formula, off a partial refunding, then you start doing other formulas, and we would adjust it through other formula into the revenues and into the savings assumption. But bond solution revenues prior. And now the reason we're doing this is because in our project finance, kind of what I said at the beginning, our objective is A, produce level savings, and then we're going to wrap the new money around the, you know, if it does produce level savings, the proposed refunding debt service, that's going to end up being the existing debt service. And hopefully we'll wrap the new money around it to produce overall level debt service. Since this is being solved in essence, it's not really being solved on the aggregate basis, right? Because the objective is first it's level savings. And what we're going to solve in aggregate is really the new money. So that's why I went in here, and it's always good regardless, because you may end up going, no, I want to solve the refund and the new money or, I have multiple refundings. I want to solve aggregate savings, not on a per refunding. Well, even if you made the change here, you can make the change, if that happens to be the case, um, on the financing side, and that will override. So just save that. Now, when I click open, click on the DEF county, go new, financing. You'll see the little bridge. I want to make sure you go file, save all. Just don't want to. I think that worked. Let's see. You don't have to always, um, close out of these. I'm just doing it just more of a habit. I would say more than anything, this is, um, I mean, you can always go first up into here. I would say out of all the modules, I'd probably first click on the add. This will allow you. Now, you may say, hey, for my project finance, my goal is I've got a bunch of different actual series. We created the 20 and the 18, 2020 and the 18. I want to pull those into project finance, and everything's already hard coded and everything. Nothing's really going to be solved. I just want to do it for reporting purposes. Well, you can also, and I'll show you Calc Agent do that, but how come I don't see anything actual series? I'll say, okay, you'll go to project finance assumption, allow computation of actual series. You activate that. Now, when I click add, you'll see it. But again, more times than not, that's why it's not activated, because it can some clients can get confused. If they see the actual series, they're like, okay, does that mean I need to select both the actual series? No, just select the refund because the actual series are attached to the refund. Mhm. Master series allocation. This is kind of before universal components were ever created. You may ask, well, how come that's still there? Well, we don't we don't want old um, we don't want any financings that have been structured using the old, very old method of master series. Wouldn't make sense if that's deleted all of a sudden. Because what if a client goes, hey, what's going on? I went back to print out reports and it's gone, you know. Um, but just know that I would say it's almost guaranteed that you'll probably never use this because it's not flexible. It's a lot more work. You basically have to create master series instead of actual series or proposed. The status is master series. So a lot easier, a lot more flexible as universal components. Um, so, but we know right now, universal bond solution, if these were solved separately, one's not wrapping around the other, you don't probably not going to create a universal bond solution. You know, we may have expenses, we may have project fund, we may have reserve funds that are calculated in aggregate, allocated to one or both or whatnot. Um, but you may not have some kind of an aggregate solution. Then you don't really need a universal bond solution, but more times than not, you probably will. So again, in this case, we want to wrap the new money around the solution, the level saving solution of the refund. Click add. I'm just going to keep the short name. I'm going to just select the new money. So only thing that's created is we selected the new money. So what's our objective overall solution? Level debt service. And we'll get into some changes. I'll say, well, that's great, but here's now my new objective. By default, we want overall level aggregate debt service. Keep it on level. Additional debt service for wrapping. Now, there's no existing debt, other debt that we put in the debt size, the new money. But if you did and you want to include it, you'd activate that there. Down here, you can click on the dot, dot, dot. This helps if you've got a ton of things that you want to pull in or import. Or you can click on a little down arrow and that will show you. And this gets into regular, gets into other, if you do have another debt service that you created in the proposed refunding series, existing debt service. Again, you may have unrefunded debt that you want to pull in as well or include it. This is fully defeased, so regular debt service only is fine. And then finally, this doesn't really matter because remember, it's doing a new money wrap around this refunding. And we'll get into like sizing target. You may say, hey, overall, I need it to be, well, I'll show you that after we run. But you can get into global target amounts and you can say, I want the new money to be, whatever let's say it's 500 million and I want that global target amount to be 500 million. Well, you can go in here and you can reduce. So you can type in 500, put in the refund to reduce the target in order, so obviously if the refunding is 300, then the new money will be 200 or 300, they have 200 million, but we'll get to that moment. Again, I'm going to click save. A lot of times size globally will also be used to produce overall rounding less than a bond. The problem is that only applies to the series, I believe, selected under series selection. You would have to go up here, contingency group, a lot of times. If all the series are not included under that series selection, right? So if they were, and you do contingency group here, 1 and 1, and then you put both series here, and both are size by series, we get this a lot. How come my overall, um, rounding is more than a bond? I put them in the same contingency group. Well, both were included in the Universal Bond Solutions Series Selection tab. That overrides. You need to select one to size globally. Oh, okay. Easy as that. Right. Universal components, add. So we may have, um, you know, issuance expense. So this is where, I was going to do this to make it easier. You can come in here and you can, right mouse click, go append if you need to even add more. You can do 5 per bond, 2 per bond, 0.5 per bond. Expenses, you can type in some kind of amount, 1% of bond value. You'll notice if you click, it's not limited to what's shown. I would say, F1, one of the few times I do searches, I'll type in NLF, natural language format. And these are, we provide examples. Kind of the joke always is it's not that when you first start trying to type in stuff, it's not that natural, but they can be very basic in nature. If then Boolean, where you can create first 50 million at 1%, anything greater, add in an additional percent. Here's all the lines that you would enter that in. So I would say type in NLF. We have examples, and how to enter that information in, or you just send us your file and we help you out. So doesn't have to always be per bond. You can do a even something like you can start getting into formulas that so this gives you a lot more flexibility. I will say though, if you go, well, some of the underwriters discount needs to be calculated in aggregate and allocated a certain way, but then I have some that are just calculated, let's say off a particular series. Well, you can create multiple issuance expenses or multiple itemized expenses. Anytime you see an icon, and again, what you can do is, and this goes for any series, this goes directly in a series. So, for example, this is what happens. We get a lot of this. Hey, I got all these expenses in here in the new money, and then all of them in here, but I want to calculate them in aggregate and allocate a certain way. What do I do? Well, if you have it like this, I let's say they're the same, doesn't really matter, but in this case, I say, okay, we can just cut that out, paste it. Right? Easy as that. Or, or tools, component gallery. First time you ever use it, you'll see something like this, a .cgl. If you've already used it or created, it will open up. You can create many different CGLs. I don't know if you ever would, but you can. I'll go open. I think, yeah, it's still in a dead size. So that way you can go into any series, and then you'll notice in the component gallery, you can select it. And it can be in a different data file. It can be in a different issuer. For example, I'll go in here, you'll see it. As long as it's tools preferences, you'll see component gallery. When you create it, you can decide where to save it, or somebody already created and said, oh, I've created all these expenses, and say it's a coworker. Oh, I have it on, here's the path. Well, you link it, then you can import theirs. You can also delete theirs. So, but again, click add, double click, create. Now, you can say, yeah, but I need to, this is a different deal. I have different formulas. Well, that's fine. You'd have to obviously update that. But that just lets you know component gallery, I think, really helps when you create, it seems like, whether it's itemized or issuance expenses, and you're creating them, and instead of starting from scratch, um, you can, as a blueprint, create it once, save it, and then you can pull it up, and the only thing you really need to change is the formula. But as you can imagine, anything, whether it's um, by default, it's going to calculate, five per bond across aggregately, and then allocate it, uh, proportional by par. But you can go in here, you can select both. You could say, I want the formulas to calculate in aggregate, but I want the full calculation to be applied towards one of the series. Mm-hmm. That's something like that. Or I want to calculate five per bond per series, not an aggregate and allocated. I want five per bond for the refunding, separate from five per bond in the new money. You can go embed. This is basically the same as if you created this in the new money and you created it in the refund. That's why if you say, well, yeah, this is going to be an expense that's basically calculated on an individual series and applied to that individual series. I should just go ahead and do it in the individual series. Well, not necessarily. You could say, no, this is just calculated, these issuance expense, 100% new money applied to new money. So that's literally if you just created in the new money, right? So F1 gives you all some more explanations. So basically, it allows you kind of any kind of construction, calculation, allocation that you want to do. It's in here. Now, control B, this will, well, that is small, isn't it? Whew, small. That's odd. Okay, I can barely see it. I must have something. Okay, here. There we go. Still a little too small. This is the FN F12 key. There we go. So, sorry about this. No, it's still small. If you do either Control B, as in bonds, you can, geez, what is going on? Why is that so small? Oh, there we go. Okay, great. So a lot of times we would have clients go, okay, for example, rates. You know, I've got whether it's 2 or 20 or 50 different series. Um, I've got, I need to make rate changes. It used to be you had to go into each individual and make those changes, right? But you can either go to the Universal Components Actions, modify bonds, which is the same thing as Control B. Okay. And you have different options here. You can do by rate, yield, price, if that's all you want, or the takedown. Or what a lot of clients like to do is go by maturity structure, and you can click on it. You know? And you can make it right here, any kind of change you want without having to go directly into the series. That's why I kind of stress, hey, if you just create the bond structuring once in the series and as part of the financing, probably won't need to go into the financing individual series at all. If you make any changes and hit execute, it will update. That's fine because I made it bigger. But you have different options here. Prior deaths, call features. Let me see. Yeah, even back to this, you could say, oh, what if my dated delivery date happened to change? As you can see here, you can make the change here. You don't have to go into the particular series. Okay. So all said, just kind of show you that's in the actions. And then Control B. But the last one was MMD yield. If you do have a TM3 account, again, we don't have that information. Tools preferences, you'd hard code that in internet settings, tools preferences, internet settings. You type that in. You can automatically click on this to download MMD, coupon files. If you don't have that, you have it in Excel, you can always go here and you can hard code in the yield MMD or the yield curves, credit, additional, hit execute. That will update across whatever you enter in to whatever series. Okay. Now, you remember we have the new money. How's that going to be solved though? Right. We want an overall level aggregate. Typically, we either need to set it to some kind of target par amount or we have some kind of a project fund. And this also goes for reserves and cap buys. So I could say new money. And again, we're not calculating this off of the refunding and we're not, allocating it to the refund. So if you just do it like this, it's going to whatever information you put in, it's going to allocate it to both. So I just selected the new money, general info, and we know about all this. We may have specific draw requirements. We enter that in. This let's just say it's a, um, let's say it's $350 million project fund. And then I'm going to go through some examples of what if it's not enough and so forth. So this is a 350 million. Let's see if 200 will make it 250 million. Right? And again, we may have a cap I. Typically, when we get this a lot, and actually I made a video that's on that YouTube channel, I believe. We get a lot. It's an FAQ. Why do I have this general fund in my net debt service report? Well, more times than not, it can be for a number of reasons. But the cap I typically, if you think about it, if it calculates 100% interest off of the new money and the refunding in aggregate, but it allocates pro rata, the allocation pro rata doesn't 100% line up individually with the new money and the refunding, right? So because it may allocate pro rata too much or not enough, actually too much to one of the series, if the interest for that individual series is 50,000, but it allocates 60,000 pro rata, you got 10,000 too much money. A general fund will be created by default until it can be applied. More times than not, you're going to want to do embed because I want to cap I 100% individually the refund, so that matches and the new money. And you can say net funded GIC. You can say bond interest accrued through, let's say 2025, let's say. And then finally, reserve fund. This will be calculated in aggregate, allocated pro rata. But interest typically, that's another reason why general funds sometimes created in a net debt service report, because we have excess monies. If you don't do anything here and we do the whatever the balance requirement happens to be, interest earnings typically will occur during that cap I period. So if cap I takes care of 100% of the interest or the debt, how the reserve fund, it's not going to apply towards debt. So what you typically do is you first have a go to a project fund or a cap I, and then you draw down the debt service. I'm going to just do the cap I, and then it'll draw down debt service. You can do lesser of test over here. Again, it's not limited to what's shown. Anything that it would be page upon page upon page. I'm going to do maximum annual aggregate debt service. That will be the balance requirement for this. And again, it may differ on yours. It might be the lesser of 10% of aggregate par or 10% of par or whatnot. You just type in all that. So this is just going to be, and again, save. Universal escrow, it's not really applicable to this because we have one. I would say if you have more than one refunding and you do have a universal escrow, that's where you go back, financing component setup. You would select yes. The only issue is it's one escrow. It will not allocate specific securities per refunding. So you really have to view the reports in aggregate. Okay. And then finally, like on everything, reporting options, you have additional titles, footnotes. You know, if I could just say, oh, okay, it's weird. Summary. Let me see. Okay. So if I did all report and I go 2024 Q4, you can do it on all reports or specific. Anytime you see in a DBC canned report, any kind of text that um, you may want to replace it with, that's where you would go if it's in the financing. Reporting options, alternate text. You could say, oh, whenever I see, you know, whatever the original text, I want to replace it with that. The one thing is make sure in the original text, you type it in exactly how it's shown in the report. That includes capitalization and lowercase. This is kind of helpful sometimes if you do want to calculate separate ARB escrow yields per reporting group. I see this sometimes a lot more if you've got maybe at least three different components, and you might have a tax exempt, let's say, and then a refunding, and you want to group or not group, but if you do, you can say calculate ARB escrow per reporting group. You do that here, and then you can give its own reporting group titles. By default, it's just going to show like that. So if you ever go, and that's even more rare. It's usually, oh, I've got three or four, but I want to group, this A and B series together. How can I do that? Well, if this was A and that was B, you put them under the same report and you would type in this and you could say series A, and B combined or whatever it happens to be. And you would go, oh, good. Now, this obviously, that would combine them together. You could just view aggregate reports. But just to kind of show you that. So click OK, click Save, click Calculate. One or more refunded bonds mature on. Remember, we talked about that. Global proceeds not used because we used actual escrows. Yeah, that's fine as well. That's just, I can't remember why, but if you have the same short name across multiple series and they have different rates, yields, price, it's going to give you that, but it doesn't calculate it wrong or anything like that. So it looks good. Sources and uses. And I'll show you also some of the solution. Anytime you see a report selected that has parentheses, and you can modify it. And I'll also show you, put that at the end. Let's say you want bond pricing, bond stats. If I highlight all of them and I do summary, I want to make sure group by report, no, by series, and then table of contents, multiple reports. Okay. So you may go through here, select, I would say escrow costs, because you remember we had that prior reserved. I want to break that cost out to show what the yield is, what securities are being purchased per portion of that escrow. Bond solution, universal bond solution. Um, Bond solution is going to be for the refund because it's not solved in the universal bond solution. And then the universal bond solution is going to be for the aggregate solution. And again, those are probably reports that you may not have viewed before. Um, but I'm going to show you why it's, if everything works, you probably don't ever view it. But if you don't, if it's not mathematically possible and or you don't select all the correct settings and you just viewing a savings report, this goes for a refunding, or you just viewing the overall aggregate debt service report, it doesn't explain and it's not going to show what's included, what's not included, and so forth. So, let me see, view. So I did that print preferences group by series. So it's broken out aggregate and then breaks out in the table of contents per series. So here's the sources and uses. And we put them in the same contingency group. That's why you see a negative because you're
stop sharing screen.
Oh, okay. How about now?
Good to go.
Okay, great. So you'll see here the additional, well, first I'll go back. Table of contents. So print preferences, project finance tab, group by series, breaks it out. These are all, breakdown or aggregate style. And then when you start doing summary, it will then break it out per series. That's what you want. Sharing contingency. That's why you see a negative because your objective, if so, is overall rounding less than a bond. Summary bonds refunded. Again, you've seen these. Set up the bonds when they get refunded. Summary refunding results. You can see the percent savings, the refunded and refunding. It's not, would be nice to have something like that. But savings. Oh, well, this is good. A lot of times we get a lot of questions saying, trying to tie out numbers. Well, obviously, if it's annual, for example, present value, that's off of each cash flow. It's not annual present value. So to tie out accurate present value calculations, you need to do it on a cash flow to cash flow basis. In this case, 6/1, 7/1, 12/1, 1/1, so forth. But if you want to go back, I would say to verify, let's see, this is still, there's, I think that's what triggered, that's what triggered it. That is bizarre. Okay, I'll go back and share. Huh, that's weird. I have to investigate that. I think that's this work computer. Okay. It's bizarre. So if everything works, right? Everything is possible. 1.3, you're never going to look at the solution, but that's not always going to be the case. Okay. So here's escrow requirements, bonds that, mature prior to first call and their interest. And then you remember that 28 or the 18 and the 20 That's when they get called. Now we can get over these rollover certificates by changing January 1st. Wait a minute. Why is that not showing cash flow? Hold on. Yeah. Trying to see. I think that's supposed to. Let me just see here. Cash flow. Oh, I bet it's. Yeah, I think it's because it was shown. Okay, let's see if this will not. I may have to keep sharing. There's some kind of a weird. No, you guys can still see it. It looks like. Okay, I don't. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. Okay, savings requirements. That's just the descriptions. Cash flow, sufficiency, and this will break out the stats. But I'm going to show you that I modified the cost report. Aggregate debt service. Again, 19. That's great. But universal bond solution. So this is showing you existing debt service, the 300, almost 350 million, right? Is the refunding debt. We're trying to structure the new debt around it. And the project fund is large enough. We're going to bond enough to create 19 million and change across the board, which is fine. This is just the new money, but I wanted to show you. Oh, here's the detail broken out. That 20, that slug purchased for that 50,000, little tiny bit of cash. Okay. But that all works, but that doesn't always happen, meaning say 25 million. Here we go. And it tells you reviewed the bond solution report. Okay. So I'm going to focus on a few of these reports. Actually, if we wanted to, if you like them in a certain pattern, you can always save these, for example. And I could say, quarter 4, 24, advance. So if I delete all these, and I can load it here, I can go to another project finance and another data file and retrieve it, for example. So that's given us a, now it's working. That is so weird. Okay. And again, you'll go through all this. Savings still works. The 1 point, that doesn't change. That's fine. But you'll notice here, aggregate debt service. We get this. How come I'm not getting level aggregate debt service? Well, universal bond solution, that's your aggregate solution. We'll say, look, you've got 355 million of the refunding. That's that existing. You only need to bond for like 27 million. Your project fund's 25 million, and then the issuance cost and the reserve and the cap I, all in all, you only need to bond for 27 to cover all of its cost. You basically can't, it's not until the latter years, right? 54 to 65. So that's why these solution reports, universal and bond, are very important because it kind of gives you that, you know, hey, this is why it, or it's not being included. You know, if we didn't wrap, so this happens a lot. If you don't, so if we go back, let's say it's 200, right? And you forget to include, to wrap, let me see, okay, aggregate. Yeah, there's some, I think there's some report that causes. So again, savings level. Again, why is that not level? That's not level. Aggregate wrap. Well, universal. You won't see existing debt. And then you'll go, oh, I didn't include the refund in order to structure around it to produce. There's no existing debt service. All right. See the 1.2 in savings, that's unused. That's the refund. So as you can see, this 353 million is not being included in the aggregate solution. That's why, one of a number of reasons why it's important. Now, you may go, okay, this is good, but maybe you don't know what the project fund uh, an amount's going to be. You know, in this case, you go, hey, I need in total par, I need it to be $500 million. You know, how do I structure that? You know, I don't know what the project new money project fund is, but I do know in aggregate it needs to be 500 million. So you go to the new money. Instead of it hard code, you'll do excess proceeds. And again, in the universal bond solution, size globally, we want 500 million. So type it in thousands, and we'll reduce target amount by this other series because it's not, remember, we're still solving for level savings. And then in aggregate, we want level debt service 500 million. Now, and if that works, it's great. It works. Let's see. Or it may not. Oh, that's not good. Maybe I need to do that in bed. Sometimes it's not because, oh, no, no, it's because that was an aggregate. I was trying to look at. Okay, so see, now we get to 500 million. So it knew to fund that amount to the new money. But you may go, okay, I need, instead of 17 million, almost 500, I need 18 million each year from 26 to 65. How do I do that? Let's see. 18 million. So we got a revenues, enter dates. And it might not be the same amount, you know. What did I say it was? 18 million a year. Yeah, 18 million a year. You may have some kind of an amount. You would hard code that in. Now, this time it's going to be fill. There's not really a global target amount or a reduction. I'm going to put both. Let's just say for, this is, I need both these series combined to have some kind of a revenue amount in aggregate to be 18. Or it could be a wrap. We could have done that wrap as well. I wanted to show, actually, here, no, see, I did it. It's fill, but it will include prior. Don't want to do that. Let's do 18 million. It's good that I did that because automatically it will include prior debt service. Print, view. Now, we're not going to get a large proceeds amount only because we're funding. Because a lot of times in a fill solution, you'll have a very large proceeds amount unless you do something like have a new money or project fund that's doing excess proceeds. Because in a fill, all you care about is maximizing the proceeds to meet these revenue amounts every year. It's not, in almost every instance, it's not going to also produce less than a bond in rounding. Those conflict. You'll see the savings. Again, this is when we're doing it in aggregate in this example. And again, you'll see here, great, that works. That lines up. But if you can imagine if the revenue amounts are, say, super small in certain years, super large in others, depending on the length, depending on what the revenue constraint happens to be, that might not be mathematically feasible. Just viewing the aggregate debt service, that doesn't answer a lot of times questions. All right. These are kind of some of the different ways to set up a project finance. Now, a lot of times you may go, look, I've got multiple series. I'm not calculating anything in aggregate or across the board. I just want, whether it's a sensitivity analysis or, some way to where I can pull up different series, combine them together. Where do I go for that? More times than not, we will recommend go to File, Calc Agent. And this is where you can select, you can select from different issuers. If you wanted to do 2015, 2018, 2020. And you can, as many as you like. They could be financings, whatnot. You can calculate, and you can not only break them out on one report if there's enough room. You can also do it individually. Now, a lot of times what this is used, it's used for this, where you want to pull in a bunch of, let's say, actual series, run, and you want to save it. Because anytime you click on open and you click on this calc agent, you'll see it saved. All right. Also, this is used for sensitivity analysis, where you can select, say there's, Yeah, there's no, this is like the base case, for example. And you can do escrow and or bond yield adjustments. You can say plus, minus 0.25, minus, you can have a lot more, bond yield adjust. And you can do it. You can do something like this. It can also be yield. Okay. And then you can do something like calculate. Here's a summary of calc agent results. You could do, let's say, refund savings, summary of refunding results, do that breakdown. I'm just kind of highlighting a couple of these. But any report, you can view an aggregate breakdown, a summary. But as you can see here, right now, doing nothing. Here's the net PV savings, 17. Obviously, with a reduction will increase. What they increase in the coupon will reduce the savings or the PV. And you can break out. And you can even rename these to make it more clear. It will break out per. But as you can see, here's the savings, the minus, 0.5. Here's, 875 per year savings. Minus 0.5, 750. Base case right now it's at 620, 621. So that's calc agent, where it's anytime you want to do a sensitivity analysis, anytime you want to really now again, I showed you project finance. You can allow actual series, but that's a way to definitely sensitivity analysis. That's what's done. Finally, on this monitor, this is where you can take a bunch of actual series, and it's kind of an early warning detective system in terms of, hey, I have a bunch of refunded debt. Can I run it through something that gives me some kind of, let's say, minimum savings, and might be worth me refunding? Now, the reason I say early warning detective system is that's because um, there are different. This is a monitor is not really a real life refunding. Real life refunding we kind of looked at, right, where the revenue constraints from start first maturity to final maturity, depending on the structure of that, will determine the structure of your new debt. Whereas a monitor, it views each maturity as if it's its own refund. It doesn't look at the other maturity dates. It just produces, here's the savings. It's not looking at other years. So as you can imagine, you could run a monitor and you can go, wow, this third year really gives me a negative savings. I'm going to delete, I'm going to try to then run it through a refund, and I'm going to remove that large principal amount. Well, you can imagine if all the other maturities produce combined, you know, uh, 20 million in debt, and then one of those years you take a bunch of principal and it's then 10 million, well, how are you going to solve level savings, right? When you've got an extreme difference in in prior structure. So if I this is these are a bunch of actual series created. Right? And what you can do from a refunding, right? You can set up your new information, right? And then you go in here and you can input if you want, or you can actually select. First, you would select, input, but from here, if you click on the monitor, any refund case, you select a monitor. And again, say it's an early warning system during volatile interest rate markets, both for new business proposals, management tool for issuers, investment bankers, continuous bond refunding, and FAQ. It'll say, here we go. Why don't the results in my refund solution match results in monitor? They're based on similar assumptions. The data is used differently in the two programs. Refund offers a detailed analysis in which the entire refunding issue is structured, the escrow is structured, and all the pieces of the solution are interconnected, like we talked about. Last concept is important to understand the difference. Monitor does a simple present value refunding analysis, assuming a present value escrow because it refunds each maturity individually. The results are not interrelated as they would be in real life refunding. So, early warning detection system, where you can just go in, select tons and tons or as many as you want, and you can say, okay, only currently callable, 90 days, currently maturing 90 days, advance refund. You can select and deselect. So you don't have to worry. You can select all the actual bonds that you've created. And you could just say, look, it's going to run through every one, but the only bonds I want it to monitor and uh, meet the criteria are, in this case, currently callable 90, currently maturity 90, advanced refundable and callable. Advanced refundable non, advanced unrefundable call in this instance, these are unchecked, right? You can activate them. You'll know what bonds you want to include or not. But we'll get that sometimes. Not a lot of clients use this, but when they do, it's how come these bonds aren't showing up? Well, you have something selected or deselected. You have something deselected, and that's, that bond is a unrefundable and callable bond. That's why it's not showing up because you don't have it activated. Oh, okay. So generate new bond by default. We're going to put in refunding bond series. We're going to use this series and the yields to compare. The escrow, a lot of times it's the lesser of ARB and or that's a lot of times for negative ARB. If you go, how come there's no negative ARB? It can mean one of two things. One, right, that um, it could be 0%. It could also mean, oh, these bonds are all called on delivery. So there isn't any negative ARB. You can put in costs. You can say minimum savings percentage. Let's say you go, no, it's got to be 2.25. Obviously, if you want to see all the bonds, you don't care, you can leave it blank. You can do minus 100%, whatever. But, and then if you want it to update or not in the refund case, you can. By default, it's going to be NA. If you click OK, and what it does, it runs through every bond that you select. And again, preferences, monitor. You can say print select for refund. You can report only selected maturities. Typically, you're going to probably want to view all of the bonds that meet, even if it doesn't meet the criteria, only because, oh, oh, that didn't like it. Okay, share. I think that's it. Oop. Okay, good. Still sharing. So I made some monitor, report changes, but as you can see here, I even activated to select a refund because you remember we said it has to be what, like at least 2.25. Right? Obviously, the savings cumulative, the savings percent. I mean, these are great. I mean, it's huge savings. Now that's based off of, in this case, um, the new yields. These are the new yields from that proposed refunding. You'll see 12, that meets a requirement. These are individual, going all the way down. Say it's 6, still yes. Still going yes. You'll notice, say it has to be 2.25. Say that when they start saying no, this is the individual. Say it's almost. But a lot of times you want to view it because probably you're not going to see something like this, all these bonds, this crazy amount of savings. Or you may, but a lot of times it's, I want at least this, for it to be worth it, say 3%. Well, you want to see bonds that might be 2%, or because you go, well, rates are changing and I want to keep my eye on it. So this again, I know one of our clients had said, oh, just at least go over an example. But um, but again, the results. So each one of these is as if it's being refunded alone. It's not looking at all the other maturities. It's just running an individual analysis. It's kind of the same as if you do a refund and you do savings by maturity. You activate that in savings assumptions. Method 2, where it basically is 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 looking at savings on a per maturity, but it's not looking at the other. But again, that FAQ kind of talks about that. So we don't get a lot of questions about monitor. Either a lot of clients don't use it, or the ones that do know it back of their hand. But don't always touch on monitor even in advance. But we did have a request to at least kind of go over an example. So, and another big question is, do I have to create all? Yes, you're going to have to create. You'll have, or somebody will, bonds to monitor. Again, early warning detective system. You kind of want to have a place instead of having to like create a refunding. And that's another thing. If you create a real life refunding and you select every bond, well, that's actually really good. But it really won't, unless you do savings by maturity method 2, it's not going to really, everything is interconnected, I guess, so to speak. So I don't know. Personally, I would probably run savings by maturity, the defaults method 1, because it takes everything, it's all inclusive. Because again, you can imagine if you're refunding a certain amount every year, and you go, oh, in a couple of these years, that produces in a monitor negative, pretty high negative savings. I'm going to remove all that debt then you're going to potentially not be able to produce your, in this case, say level savings, right? Because it's going to try to do level savings off of 20 million a bunch of years and then 2 million in others. It's like, okay, well, how do you get level savings then? So that's kind of difficult, right? Or it's mathematically not really possible. But that's why we're here. We can show you that and say, well, you can't structure level savings if the bonds you're trying to refund vastly differ, um, especially if it's kind of all over the map. Um, so let's see. Trying to think if there's anything else from the project finance. So I did show on in both combined. And again, the great thing about project finance is that it pretty much can handle any type of structuring. Um, the but if you haven't used it much, I guess the difficulty is because it doesn't really handhold you. It's because it pretty much can handle any kind of structuring. You know, you have to kind of just know what kind of structuring, where to enter that information. But again, we have the tutorial through help. Um, I'll definitely be putting this up and send you guys the link once that gets done. Um, and I'm trying to think. And then obviously, it's like anything, project finance, you know, there's so many different types of structuring. It could be taxable tail, it could just be, you know, um, two series, one refunding, it can be 20 to 30 different there's just so many different types. Drawdown bonds, there's all kinds, tax exempt. If it is taxable, um, most times you're going to go in here and you're going to select no for the taxable because generally taxable are not calculated ARB escrow in aggregate. Um, so, you know, that's another thing about, the trainings is that, you know, some clients can structure certain types and some other types. And, uh, you know, because it's so flexible, you can literally do anything. Um, we kind of try to stress, okay, here's at least how to enter the information. And then if yours is nuanced from this, that's where either training video or just send us help email data to DBC and say, you know, um, if I was here and if I just said current document only and just, it's training, ignore. So you would send, and it will say debt size, or if you send your financing's been successfully sent. And what happens is it gets sent. Someone in my group goes to the others, I got it. And the first person that says, I got it, will open up your file. And most of the time, if it's descriptive enough, we'll be able to, you know, reply back, screenshot, all that kind of stuff if it needs be. And, or we'll reply back, say, okay, well, do you mean this or that? And get you on your way. I'm sure everybody knows 9 to 6 Eastern time, Monday through Friday is support. We still try to, it's not guaranteed Monday through Friday. Um, we still try. It's not like all of us 100% outside of support hours just turn the computer off and don't look. A lot of times, one of us or multiple may look and We don't maybe want a big load of support questions in the morning. So sometimes we will and we'll answer outside, but just know 9 to 6 Eastern time, Monday through Friday, is the support hours. So if you do send us your file outside of that, just kind of keep that in mind. It's a lot of the times we will answer, but it's not. Basically, if we don't, then we're not held accountable. So we've only had a couple times, I would say, since I've been here, where I've had a client kind of get upset, like, "Well, you've answered my questions before at midnight," and it's like, "Well, okay, but you know." So um, sorry about the beginning. That was very odd, but thankfully we got it on track. And whoever blurted out that you couldn't hear me, thank God it wasn't more than, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes. So I hope this helped everyone. I, you know, kind of made it on time. I know I put 3 hours. It doesn't always, go that. Now I know it was started, had to start over, but I know there's only so much you can kind of absorb. Um, but did that kind of monitor example, kind of a few different financings, the refund showing you the funds on hand, and component gallery. And if you know you're doing a financing, it's always best to, if you can, kind of create it on the financing level, because you can from here see, through universal components actions, you can modify bonds, you can modify call features and so forth, rates, yields, all that kind of stuff. um I think that pretty much covers it. um
Thank you, Kay. This is helpful.
oh, you're welcome. No problem. And again, sorry about that's bizarre, because on my side, my microphone wasn't muted. In fact, it said, "Do you want to mute it?" And I was like, "No." But anyway, I'm going to stop recording. Don't need to do that.